Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on the place from where you are in this session, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Richa, and I work as Education Support Manager at ACCA. So, our session today is designed to support you with audit assurance paper, where the expert will take you through the latest examiner report, sharing brief insights with some tips about the upcoming September 23 exams, and also answering your questions live. And I'm very pleased to be joined by our expert tutor, Erin Morton. Before I hand over to Erin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items very quickly. At the bottom of your screen, there are a number of buttons you can use. There is a help icon on the left, which provides resources and information to help you resolve any technical issues you might experience. Icons for the slides and media player are there. You will need to see both of these during the webinar, so make sure you have selected them. Attendee chat function is there, so you can engage with your fellow webinar attendees. That's the icon on right hand side. Resource list, if you click on this, you will be able to access resources relevant to today's session, including all the direct links, important links, I would say. You can rearrange your screen to suit you and resize the windows if you need to. And if at any point you cannot hear what we are saying or you cannot see any visuals, please do refresh your browser. Registering for this webinar means you will be sent an email tomorrow with details of how you can listen to it again. So don't worry, if you miss something or you have any technical issue, you will be able to access the recording of the session. I'm going to hand over to Erin in a moment and will be back with you towards the end of the session. In the meantime, if you would like to ask ACCA or Erin a question, then please click on Q&A button, which is the middle icon at the bottom of your screen. Please note, we cannot guarantee responding to everyone directly, either verbally or via web chat, but we hope that the questions we share will be helpful to everyone. Over to you, Erin.
Thanks, Risha. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm going to get started with our agenda just so that we are happy with what we're going to cover in the next hour. So a little introduction from me. Then we're going to look at the examiner's report, just a bit of an overview of some of the things that you get from that and why it's so beneficial for you to review those in preparation for your exam. Not just audit and assurance, but for any ACCA exam that you guys will be preparing for on your ACCA journey. Then we'll have a little chat about some techniques for success as well. So some specific audit and assurance exam technique ideas and things to think about in the preparation that you've got for the remaining 2.5 weeks. And then we'll finish off with a Q&A. As Risha said, send in some questions. I do find that there's often a bit of a duplication. Lots of people want to know the similar things. So we'll have some time to try and collate some of those questions and try and answer as many as I can in the remaining part of this webinar. Little introduction about me for those of you who are not aware who I am. My name's Erin Morton, and I have been looking after audit and assurance and teaching audit and assurance for the last 20 years as a tutor. I worked at Kaplan for nearly 9 years, and then I've been freelancing and working with various providers, writing and creating material and teaching, and now I run my own courses on FME Learn Online. I got the job as an audit tutor, so I ended up being given the role as an audit tutor because I was an auditor previously. So I used to work for Mazars, and I was working there for over about 8.5 years. I did my AAT, and then I did my ACCA, so I'm also ACCA qualified and a member. So I have been in your shoes. I know how it feels. So, and now I'm also being trusted by ACCA as part of their expert tutor team and looking after audit and assurance and helping deliver advice and help for all of you guys. So my first question to you is, do you normally read the examiner's reports? Do you use it as part of your preparation? So hitting you with a poll now. So if you can answer that question, so by selecting yes, no, or what are they, that would be great. So just getting some submissions in, but I'll give you a little bit of time to answer that question. And then we will see how the land lies with all of you guys in the room. Okay, quite a few coming in now. So do you read that examiner's report? Give you a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, right. Quite a substantial amount of you have answered that poll now. So let's see. Oh, wow. I love the comedians in the room. Thank you guys for what are they? But yes, so it's not a landslide victory for the examiner's report, is it? So 58.2% of you are already using the examiner's reports as preparation, but there's quite a chunk of you that don't review it. And so it's important to be aware of what you're missing out on. So let's have a look at some of the key benefits. So why is it important for an examiner's report to be reviewed? It's direct feedback from your examining team. Every exam has its own examining team, and they specifically know what they want you to do. They have a visual idea of what they want to see your answers look like. So getting feedback from that team and getting an idea of what they want and understanding what they want really helps you to pass this exam. It also gives you advice on how to approach your answers as well. They do include some examples of questions as well. So in particular, looking at section A questions for audit and assurance, those OTQs, looking at scenarios and some multi-choice answers, they're quite hard to come by. You don't have abundances of them. It's kind of like exam kits and the odd mock exam here and there. So it gives you an example of a bank of questions, which we'll look at in a bit, and it gives you some good debrief and information on how candidates answered in the previous exam. Plus, it's free expert advice, and we all love freebies, don't we? So, by getting that feedback from the examine team and understanding what they want, you're getting everything you need in preparation. So in the last examiner's report, so we have got the March-June 2023 sample paper. That's now been released on the ACCA practice platform. So you have a copy of that to practice. And then the examiner's report sits with that, and you've got it on the ACCA website. And so that report talks about the sample questions that were selected there. But what it also does is give you an insight into some section A questions as well. So in section A, it talks about time management. And it also encourages you to read the requirement, because we know some of the big challenges with section A is actually understanding what the examiner's asking you to do. And sometimes it's very easy to misread the answer. So by encouraging you to read the requirement, but what I would also say is make sure you read it at least twice. And so, making sure you definitely understand what they're asking you to do so that you've got more chance of selecting the correct answer. The other thing that you need to be aware of and to think about in terms of exam technique for the AAA exam and for all of the exams is, remember, you don't have to answer these questions in order. If you come across a question in section A, for example, and it just makes your head hurt, so you just don't know what the answer could be and you can't think about it right now, just flag it. You've got that navigator tool at the bottom of the screen. You can flag that as a red flag, and then you can come back to it later on. And I remember on my ACCA journey looking at exam questions, and at that moment in time thinking, I can't answer that question right now. I don't remember that. And then leaving it and going off and carrying on with the rest of the questions. And then at some point, when my brain started to relax, I was able to remember some of the information that would help me with that question. And then I could just jump back to it and answer that question much more calmly. So using the tools, making sure you're reading those requirements carefully and making sure that you're understanding as much as you can what the examiner wants. We know they're challenging. So, have a bit of respect for section A and make sure that you are practicing those questions and looking at these ones as well. So in this examiner's report, they gave us a snapshot of one of the section A question banks. We know in section A, you're going to have 3 scenarios and you're going to have 5 questions attached to each scenario. The example that they've given you is one about Kamari, and it's talking about other services. So not just the external audit, it's also looking at other services that they are looking for you to help them on. They want you to provide a financial forecast. So they want to, because they're funding their next growth phase, the directors are applying for a bank loan and they have prepared some forecasts, and they want you as an audit firm to do a insurance assurance engagement review of the financial forecasts that they have produced. So it's another service aside from your external audit. So that's one piece of work that they're looking for you to do. They're also looking for some help with internal audit as well. And they tell you that as the company's growing, the directors need you to provide internal audit services, and they've outlined that there is a specific review of the processing of sales invoices as the new system is being used. So we've got that as another service to potentially be aware of. So that sets the scene. We can see that we're looking at additional services, and we're looking specifically at internal audit and financial forecasts. Then the questions would have been related to that. So the first question was kind of like a click question, so it's a select question, so you had to fill in the gaps. So it says identify by clicking on the relevant box in the table below whether each of the statements about audit and assurance engagements is true or false. So this is looking at all assurance engagements that you could possibly get involved with as an audit firm. So the first one, audit engagements always provide reasonable assurance. As an audit engagement, yes, they do. If you're carrying out an audit engagement, you need to make sure that you are looking at a high level of detail and you're producing a positive report. So it's always going to be a reasonable assurance engagement, whereas other services are often limited assurance, so they will be slightly different. The next one was true and fair view means the financial statements contain no misstatements. That's false, because from our studies, from our learning, we know that true and fair means that there's no material misstatements. So there may be some misstatements, but they might be quite small. Most non-audit engagements provide reasonable assurance. So non-audit engagements, for example, maybe reviewing cash flow forecasts, looking at any other future budgets, looking at the financial forecast that they've asked you to do in this scenario, they're not going to necessarily need the same amount of detail that an audit engagement needs. So therefore, it might be that you provide limited assurance on those as opposed to reasonable. And then finally, there are 4 elements to an assurance engagement. There are not 4 elements to an assurance engagement. There are 5. Remember the 5. We need to have, in every assurance engagement, we need to have the 3 parties involved in the process. So we'll have a practitioner, we will have a responsible party, and we will have an intended user. So we have those 3 parties. We also need to have a subject matter. So for example, if it was the audit, it would be the set of financial statements that we're looking at. We need to make sure that we've got some suitable criteria. So for example, the standards that we need to follow to make sure that it's being dealt with properly. We need to have evidence as well. So making sure that we are gathering evidence to help form finally the 5th one, which is the conclusions. So remember, there's 5 elements of an assurance engagement. So that was another little trick question. So do you know how many there are? So that one we didn't do as a poll because it was proving far too complicated to set up on this system. However, the remaining questions we're going to see what you think and what kind of answers you would come up with. So let's look at the second question that they gave us in the examiner's report. They ask us which of the following statements about the non-audit services that the directors of Kamari have asked them to provide is true. So non-audit services, which one of these statements is true? THERA cannot accept both engagements for ethical reasons. Limited assurance will be provided by the review of the financial forecasts. The intended users in the engagement to review the financial forecasts will be Kamari shareholders, or both engagements will be conducted under international standards of auditing. So there's only one answer that's true. So which one would you choose? So poll is open now so that you can select which one of those. So which of the following statements about non-audit services is true? CIRA cannot accept both engagements for ethical reasons. Limited assurance will be provided by the review of financial forecasts. The intended users in the engagement to review the financial forecast will be Kamari shareholders, or both engagements will be conducted under international standards on auditing. So I'll give you a little bit of time just to make your choice as to which one you would answer if you had that question in the exam. Okay, just a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, let's see. So in terms of how you voted, so we've got 67% of you going for limited assurance, and then there's just a few percentages here and there for the others. The correct answer was B. So limited assurance will be provided by the review of the financial forecasts. Remember, non-audit services don't need reasonable assurance, therefore limited assurance is often more appropriate. CIRA cannot accept both engagements. Well, they can, as long as they've got relevant safeguards in place. We need to make sure that they are able to, look after them properly. So they might need separate teams, for example, but it's not a straight no. The intended users in the engagement will be the shareholders. No, because it's a separate service. It's not an audit service. It's a non-audit service. And it's something that management have asked them to do. So actually your intended user is going to be the directors. And then the last one, so both engagements will be conducted under international standards of auditing. Only an audit service will need that. So therefore that wouldn't be relevant for the additional work that they've asked. Okay, right, next question then. So example 3, which two, so we can select 2 for this one, which 2 of the following are potential disadvantages of Kamari Co outsourcing internal audit to CIRA? So if they're going to outsource their internal audit function, what are some of the disadvantages? Could it be a greater range of experience would be brought to the internal audit team? It could create a self-review threat during the external audit. It could create a conflict of interest with the financial forecast review. And otherwise, the internal audit function would have less understanding of the business. Okay, poll is open. Which 2 would you choose? Okay. Not many coming in at the moment, so I'll give you a few seconds even, just to make a choice so that we can have a chat about the answer. Okay, coming in now. So which 2 would you create? 3, 2, 1. Okay, right, let's look at the answers. So in terms of who voted for what, we can see that 58.6% of you created for B, and 6.9 for C, and 34.5 for D. Okay, correct answers. Let's look at the overall poll. So B and D were the correct answers. Those were the 2. So having a disadvantage of having an outsourced internal audit is it can create a self-review threat, because you would need to make sure teams are separate so that they don't have additional information that they shouldn't be aware of. The internal audit function would have less understanding of the business, which is also true, because they may come in for ad hoc projects, for example, like the one they suggested in this scenario, where they wanted you to look at the sales and processing system relating to the financial reporting system. So that's like a mini project. So it might be they're working on other clients and looking at different businesses, and they're coming into yours just for a short period of time. So that's another disadvantage. A greater range of experience, well, that's an advantage for an internal audit team, so I wouldn't say that's a disadvantage. And then C, creating a conflict of interest with the financial forecast review, that wouldn't be necessary. They are both non-audit services, so wouldn't be concerned about that at all. So B and D were the correct answers for that. Example 4, this next one. Which two of the following procedures would Thura & Co. carry out if it was to accept the engagement review of the financial forecasts of Kamari? So if they were going to accept the work to do the financial forecast for them, which two procedures would they carry out? Would they inquire with the bank as to the format of the financial forecast needed to support the application? Would they perform analytical review on the previous financial year statements to ensure the forecasts are consistent with past trends? Would they obtain a written representation from management stating that they have fulfilled their responsibilities in the preparation of the financial forecasts? And would they inquire of Kamari's directors as to any assumptions which have been made in preparing the forecasts? So again, we can choose two. So which two procedures would you think are most relevant in relation to the review of those forecasts? Poll is open now. Okay. I think we might have a bit of a technical issue. Hopefully this one is working okay. If you can choose your two, that would be great. Okay, give you a few more seconds, then we'll talk about the answer again. Okay, a few more seconds. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so in terms of the two, the poll selected looks like you've got 77.4 picking B and 74.8 picking D. So those are the most popular answers out of the 4. Let's look at the correct answer. So picking the correct 2, it would have been B and D. So well done, everybody. Ensuring the financial forecast review, you would carry out analytical review because you would want to compare the previous year's information to what's going on. So that makes perfect sense. And also talking to the directors as to anything that they've done in the preparation of their work and any assumptions that have been made, so they can decide whether that looks reasonable or not, is another good task to carry out for that team. Why we wouldn't talk to the bank? Well, we don't need to because we are reporting to management. So management should have all of that information. So they will be telling us how they want it formatted. So we don't need to go direct to the bank. There's no reason to. And written representations are, again, unnecessary because we're not going to get management to confirm their responsibilities when we are reporting to management. It's different in an external audit because we are reporting to the shareholders. So in this situation, we wouldn't need any written representations. Okay, well done. Last one. This one was looking at the internal audit assignment itself. So looking at the review that we were asked to do for internal audit, they said, look, what type of internal audit assignment does the review of procedures around sales orders and the processing of invoices represent? Is it an operational audit? Is it a financial audit? Is it a value for money audit? Or is it an IT audit? Okay, which one would you choose? Again, give you a few seconds to answer that. Okay, just a few coming in now. This is the last poll. So which one would you pick? A, B, C, or D? Okay, a few more seconds. 3, 2, 1, go. Well done. Okay, so answers come in and we've got operational audit and financial audit as the main lead runners. The correct answer is it's a financial audit. The processes relating to orders and invoices all link to the financial reporting system, which is why it would be regarded as a financial audit. All of the others would not be relevant for that question. So, well done. Let's have a little move on then. So section A, as I said, has its challenges. So having a bank of questions in these reports helps you practice those questions and get an understanding from the examiner's team as to what they want you to answer in the exam. So definitely worth having a look at those for that extra practice. Now, the other things that come up in the examiner's report is the highlights on section B. So they talk through the questions and how they were answered and give you a bit of insight into what went wrong and what candidates did well and what they didn't do well in the previous sittings. So one of the questions in section B was called Petra. It was the 30-mark question, and it was relating to controls and systems, and it also had some corporate governance in it as well. Now, the main takeaways from the examining team from this report was not to ignore the knowledge areas. So there tends to be a lot of practice because deficiencies might come up and direct controls might come up. And there's a lot of practice on picking things from the scenario and then practicing how to answer and expand on that in your answer. But then often you forget all of the other bits that are going on in the syllabus and reading all of those key knowledge areas, which then end up being quite poorly answered. So definitely don't ignore knowledge areas or instructions. So make sure you read those questions carefully and make sure that you are reading around the whole syllabus. So not just focusing on section B application questions. Be careful of verbs as well. So make sure that you are happy with the verbs that they're asking. If they ask you to describe, they want you to add more depth to your answer. If they want you to explain, again, you need to show that you understand why you've included that. If they ask you to list, then you can be much more brief. So just think about the words that they're asking in the requirements so that you know how much you should be putting in. Direct controls came up as a flag in terms of there was lots of being generated quite well, but some of them were diluted. So almost splitting the direct control into two and putting them down as two separate direct controls when in fact combined is what made the direct control. So make sure that you understand the definition of a direct control. So the fact that it will prevent error and fraud, and therefore it would be quite a big process that would be quite effective in the system. So for example, if they tell you that they've got a sequential ordering system for their sales invoices, that's great. But having a sequence of orders is not going to, on its own, just stop fraud and error. What you need is someone actually checking that sequence, reviewing that on a regular basis to ensure that they do pick up if anything hasn't worked properly. So making sure that you're including the whole direct control. Also, don't explain as an explanation, don't just use, oh, because it prevents error and fraud. We know that all direct controls prevent error and fraud. So having that as your strap line at the end is not going to give you that additional half a mark. So you'll need to be more specific to the control. And then also try and use observe as little as possible. Again, it was picked up by the examining team in terms of tests of control. If you can do other things, so if you can inspect documentation and if you can reperform things, then you don't need to just observe. So that will be available, that will be given credit if there's not really much else available. But if there's other things, then you should be using those as examples. And then finally, recommendations should be detailed. So making sure that you are writing enough and you're explaining it as clearly as possible. The other question that came up in section B was lapis from our sample paper. So this was looking at audit risk and planning, and it actually included a section on quality management, so on ISA 220. Takeaways from that was that ISA 220 knowledge was quite weak, so it was quite poorly answered. People didn't really know how to approach that question. So make sure, again, you're not ignoring the knowledge areas, that you're not just focusing on application questions, that you are actually looking at the whole syllabus and remembering some of those things that are quite easy to forget. Use the highlight function when you're planning your answer as well. So we'll show you an example in a little while before we finish today of kind of how to approach a section B question, but by highlighting and copying and pasting, that really helps with the planning and preparation of your answer. Prep those accounting standards as well. So that was another thing, making sure that you are comfortable with the accounting standards that are relevant to audit and assurance. Remember, those are the ones that relate to anything relating to financial accounting, not financial reporting. So at the foundation level, accounting standards, you should have a good awareness of those. You don't need to know all of the accounting standards that come up in FR at the applied skill stage. So make sure that you are comfortable with those so that you can recall information. And then misstated. So a lot of the time when you're talking about an audit risk, you'll say the risk is that this balance could be misstated in the accounts. That's only allowed if it's really clear that it could be over or understated. However, a lot of the time we are focusing on something being overstated or it being understated. So don't hedge your bets all of the time and say misstated, otherwise they won't give you the marks. You need to be quite specific. Audit responses, the actual responses themselves, so what the auditor should be doing to deal with that risk should be a practical approach that the auditor should take. You don't have to list audit procedures, you don't have to write them out even as audit procedures, but they can link to work that you would carry out, whether it's controls work or substantive work, and it could also link to the way the team's formed as well. So just make sure that you are practicing those questions and being quite practical about what the auditor would do. And then the other thing is always explain why you've put something into this answer. So in terms of the audit risk questions, picking out audit risks is going to give you up to half a mark at best if you're not explaining why they are an audit risk. So make sure that you aren't ignoring that piece of information that the examining team needs. For example, if we had an audit risk, we need to explain what we've found. Here's one that we've got from Lapis. So one of the things in the scenario they told us was that they were developing a new smart television model. $1.6 million of costs incurred to date will be capitalized within intangible assets. The model is still under development. So we've got that, brilliant. That's up to half a mark. However, to get the full mark, you need to explain that audit risk. Oh, sorry, let me go back. Gone. There you go. So there is a risk that all costs will not be allowed to be capitalised in accordance with IAS 38, and intangible assets and profit will be overstated. So I've explained the direct impact that that could have on the audit team. So we're worried about the capitalisation not being allowed because of accounting standards rules. And I've also explained what could happen to the balances in the financial statements. So making sure that you've got that additional sentence, and then that secures your full mark. The same goes for your direct costs as well. Sorry, direct controls as well. So in the example in the sample paper, one of the things that came up in direct controls was that the payroll supervisor selects a sample of payslips, recalculates the gross pay and calculation, so they're making sure the accuracy is there, and they investigate any differences. You need to explain why that is. So this reduces the risk of automated system errors not being detected on a timely basis, and it prevents over or underpayments. So again, I've been very specific, making sure that we're answering specifically relating to that system. They're not relying on just automated calculations, and making sure that there aren't any mistakes being made as a result of just assuming that the system's going to work on its own. Control deficiencies, again, we need an explanation. So, a deficiency that came up in the scenario was that sales staff can give discounts up to 8% and they're not reviewed. Lovely, but the problem with that is that sales staff can do pretty much, they could grant discounts to people unnecessarily. There could be a loss of revenue as a result. So I need to let the marker know why that is a problem and show my understanding. So that extra sentence, unnecessary discounts may be given to hit sales targets, leading to loss of revenue. Again, that ensures that I'll get a full mark for my control deficiency. So don't get into the habit, even when you're preparing questions now, don't be in the habit of just picking things out from the scenario and not explaining them. The explanation is always the most challenging bit, so it needs practice, and you need to be doing that now rather than just leaving that till the exam day. Okay, The last question that was in section B that we had some review on in the examiner's report was on Heron, and that was our substantive audit procedures question. And it had a bit of a surprise because it had subsequent events in it instead of audit reports, which was a scandal. However, takeaways from that: once again, audit procedures not being explained properly. So we need to make sure every audit procedure is a clear instruction. You need to be able to give that to someone, and someone should be able to just go and do that work. So you need to have an action. What are they actually doing? Do you want them to inspect? Do you want them to recalculate? Do you want them to, I don't know, reperform? What is it that you want them to do? Then you need a source. So what are they looking at? Where are they going? And then you need to also explain why. So make sure that they have enough description, but they are a clear instruction. Time management as well is something to be careful of. Often with the substantive audit procedure question, it's a 20-mark question, and it's often quite nicely split equally between different areas of the financial statements. So you'll have maybe, like 5 marks on one area, 5 marks on another area. So making sure that you've got your time management between each bit. Make sure that you are only answering the requirement. So, for example, one of the questions asked specifically for substantive audit procedures relating to non-current assets, additions only. So then if you start talking about opening balances, and if you start talking about disposals, that's not going to give you any marks. So you need to make sure you are keeping to the requirement and being very careful. And also, analytical procedures are not helpful for one-off events. For example, they had looking at a provision in the financial statements. It was new. There is no point saying you're going to compare this year's provision to last year's provision, because there wasn't one last year. So therefore, an analytical procedure would not be relevant or appropriate at that point. So if it's a one-off event, analytical procedures won't help. Often with other areas, they will. And then finally, subsequent events, which was a nice revisit of an area that we haven't seen come up very regularly. Make sure that you're aware that they are reviewed before the audit report. So anyone then going on to talk about audit report procedures didn't get any marks. It's about what's going to happen before you form your final conclusions. Okay. Now, let's have a little look about how we're going to prepare to pass AA with the remaining 2.5 weeks that you have got. One of the key tools that you have available to you now is the ACCA Study Hub. Hopefully, lots of you have had lots of reviews of that already and had a look. A very useful tool. There's some additional reading there. There's lots of quizzes. There's additional question practice. So there's a little video coming up now, which is then just going to recap and show you some of the key areas. Key things that it includes before I play those. So we've got quizzes, flashcards, practice tests, and just remember, if you haven't accessed it yet, the way that you're going to access it is to log into your My ACCA, go to My Qualifications, and then select the ACCA Study Hub, and you'll be brought straight in where you can then select the subject area that you're reviewing.
Let's take a closer look inside Study Hub, your ultimate study resource. It's a digital hub. Study Hub gives you online access to study materials from ACCA. It works like an ebook with added interactivity. It's a knowledge hub. Study chapters help to increase your understanding. A visual overview shows all the topics in each chapter, so it's easy to see how they link up. It's a revision hub. End of chapter quizzes put your knowledge to the test. The multiple choice questions are automatically marked so you can review your performance. Flashcards test your knowledge of key definitions. Check your answer against the definition on the reverse of the card. Practice questions help you prepare for your exams. You can instantly compare your answers to the suggested solutions. It's an anywhere hub. Whenever and wherever you want to work, Study Hub is there on web and mobile. It's a success hub. 79% of students said Study Hub made them more confident. 90% said they would use Study Hub again. Use Study Hub to help boost your progression. Just go to your My ACCA account and click on the Study Hub link.
was a lovely video, wasn't it? So again, hopefully Study Hub is something that can really enhance your learning, and there's lots of additional material which will be beneficial for you in the remaining couple of weeks, particularly if you're looking for extra question practice. Now, last bits to look at from me before we go to the Q&A. So we've got a few tips in terms of AA success, and then I want to show you some of a good approach to a Section B question. So in terms of techniques for AA success, I would say there's 3 golden gems for me. Make sure that you plan your answers. Don't just dive in. Have some structure and be as clear as possible. You want to make sure that you're being friends with the marker and getting them to help you get some marks. And you need to also be smart with your time. For anyone who's resitting audit and assurance, or for anyone who's been practicing questions in a disciplined way so far, you know how time pressured it can be if you are trying to complete everything properly. So making sure that you're being clever with your time is really important. So in terms of planning, as I've mentioned before, don't just dive into your answers and not think about the structure, and make sure that you are, being more methodical with the way that you're actually answering each area, and use those CBE functions that you have in your system when you're answering your question to help you structure. You have the highlights so that you can highlight elements of the text. You have the copy and paste function, so you can actually copy and paste elements into your answer that you can then help develop, and that saves you lots of time typing, and helps you form a nice skeleton plan. And then you can in terms of approaching this, you're reading your scenario, and as you're going through the scenario, you can pick out things that you are relevant with and you think might work. And then once you've picked them all out, then you can look at them and go, okay, that works. I'm going to expand on that. I'm going to ignore that bit. I'm going to move on to another bit. I like that area as well. So you don't have to develop everything that you've picked out. You only have to develop the bits that are going to really help you. In terms of being clear, make sure you present your answers clearly. It's amazing how many people don't think of this, but from a marker's perspective, and I've marked lots and lots of scripts, if I'm presented with points that have been made and then there's a space between each one, or even, just referencing the answer that you're answering if they've got multiple requirements in one box, and leaving gaps in between each bit, it's so much easier for me to read, and it's so much easier for me to see whether you've typed enough to be able to get a mark, or whether maybe it's just half a mark. And it's quicker for me to mark, which makes me happy. Whereas otherwise, if I'm presented with a big chunk of text, a sea of writing, and I've got to just literally constantly read through it and work out where one point starts and the other one ends, I might miss something really important, because that takes a lot more concentration. Plus, it's also going to be difficult for you to see whether you wrote enough points. So make sure that you are presenting your answer as clearly as possible. Don't waffle as well. I've had this quite a lot with students, and I've said, it's great that you know all of this information, but it's not answering the question. Only put in what you actually need. You don't need to introduce your answer. You just need to give the answer. That's all the marker wants. And be that marker's friend. So just in general, if you are trying to help them read your answer correctly, giving them that space between points, presenting and trying to write as clearly as possible just really helps them out, and then they can help you. Being smart with your time. Make sure that you think about the time allocated, not just for a whole question, a 20-mark question at 36 minutes. We know that, but also then look at the individual requirements and how long you should be spending on each, and plan that out as you're doing your answers, so that you're not overrunning, and keeping an eye on that time so that you don't overrun. It's not going to be a work of art. When you walk out of that exam, you're going to go, oh, that I could have written that so much better. That would have been so much better explained if I'd done it that way. But in the time that you've got and the pressure you're under, you are not going to write the most beautiful piece of work. It's impossible for most students. So don't expect to create that work. What you need to do is be strategic. You need to get that answer in as clearly as possible and move on, so that you can answer every single part of the exam. And the way that you're going to do that is to practice. The only way you're going to get better and faster and more efficient at these questions is to keep practicing questions and making sure you are timing yourself. So not just spending hours looking at these questions, timing yourself, and being disciplined in your review as well. So really thoroughly reviewing your answers also. Now, in terms of your section B approach, I did promise you that we would look at that. So we've got a short video of just how to approach some of those questions where you've got big chunky scenarios. Let's have a look. Section B questions can be overwhelming, which is why it's important to approach these questions in a calm and measured manner. Having a plan is important, and there is lots to get through and time won't be on your side. So when you have a massive scenario like the one we see here in this 30-mark question, you need to be able to pull out information quickly to help you structure a marks-winning answer. Read those requirements first so that you know what you're looking for. Here we can see that they're asking us to identify and explain 5 deficiencies and recommend a control to address the deficiency. You then have to describe the test of control, and we can see there are 15 marks split evenly, so 5 marks for dotty 1, 5 marks for dotty 2, and the same for dotty 3. The next step is to look at those verbs. They help you plan how much you need to write. In dotty 1, we've got identify and explain deficiencies. So there's 2 things needed, which will give you half a mark to identify and then another half a mark to explain the impact that that would have on the client. Ideally, a 2-sentence approach. The next one is looking at recommending a control. So it's 1 command this time, and so we're looking for 1 to 2 sentences typing your action that the client should carry out to improve that part of the system. And then finally in dotty 3, it says describe a test of control. 1 command again, but describe means detail. Remember, all procedures, including tests of control, need to have an action, a source, and a reason for doing it. Once you've done that, then it's a case of reading the scenario from top to bottom to get a feel for the information that you need to pull out for your answer. You can then start actively reading. So the next step would be to work through the scenario and copy and paste deficiencies you find as you go so that you can build your plan in the answer table. First one's here, so I can Control C, and then I can click into my answer area and hit paste. I can then highlight them so that then I can see in the scenario how many I have been collecting and look at the pattern as I work through the scenario. We can see that by scanning that scenario and picking out the deficiencies as I go, I've managed to accumulate 7 deficiencies, and I only need 5. And so I can pick my favourite 5. You don't have to start at the top when you are starting to generate your answers. Pick your favourite ones, perhaps the deficiencies that you've seen before in other questions, and pick the ones that you know you can score well in. Then it's time to add that second sentence to explain the deficiency. So I'm going to pick, for example, the one at the end because I know that one and I feel really comfortable with it. So to get that other half a mark, I need to explain what could happen if they do not address the deficiency. Looking at this one, for example, looking at the reconciliations only happening every 3 months for the other bank accounts, it means that if there was fraud occurring, it may not be identified on a timely basis, so it could carry on longer than it needs to. You can then add the recommendation. So here, very simply, I want to make sure that all bank accounts are reconciled each month and that they do investigate any reconciling items and that they maintain that monthly review by the finance director. And then you can go and finish the last part of that particular deficiency, which is then the test of control. So looking at what the auditor needs to do to ensure that that control is working effectively. remembering that it needs to be detailed and described well so that we've got a clear instruction, but enough information so that someone could go off and do that work. So here we need to review a sample of those monthly bank reconciliations for all of the accounts, because that's what we've recommended happens. So for evidence of that monthly review, so making sure that they do get carried out on a regular basis. You can then work through your plan and pick out the next favourite one, for example, and then the next favourite one, so that you then have your 5 all explained properly with their recommendations and their test of control. You could then delete or leave the deficiencies you didn't expand on. It doesn't matter, as the marker will only mark your best 5. Then once you've done your 5, it's time to move on. Time management is important in this exam, and time wasted in adding more than you need could leave you missing out on some nice marks elsewhere. Okay, so hopefully some tips there just to help you in terms of how to approach these questions, which can be quite challenging, as we know. Now, just moving on to the next slide. So I'm just going to jump onto this one now. So just quickly, with 2 weeks to go, some of the things that you should be thinking about doing. So there you go. Right, it's back. Reviewing the syllabus area. As I mentioned before, those knowledge areas can't be ignored. So make sure you're looking at all elements of what you've learned and not just cherry picking and focusing on your favorite bits or the bits that you know come up regularly. Timed question practice. Timing is of the essence with this exam, so make sure you're timing yourself, not just with section B questions, also section A ones as well. Attempt to mock or more. We know we've now got the pre-September 23 mock on the practice platform. You can use that wisely. You've got some debrief recordings on the YouTube channel as well that you can use to help with your thorough debrief, but you can attempt that mock as a whole mock and, you know, give yourself that 3 hours and see how you do in the time that you've got. Use the practice platform as well. Make sure that you are practicing questions as much as possible using the platform so that you are getting used to the whole environment of your exam and not just, you know, working off a textbook, and definitely no writing out answers. We need to be typing them because that's how you're going to do it in your exam. And as we've said, using this examiner's report really helps you with that additional information and that insight from the examining team, plus also articles on the ACCA website as well, give you that insight as well. Last tip from me is bite-sized study sessions. So instead of saying you're going to work all day on audit and assurance, you need to be picking chunks of your day and, you know, maybe 1.5 to 2.5 hours. You could do some section A questions. You could time yourself with a section B question. You could do a little bit of reading on a particular area that you've been finding difficult, and you can debrief some answers. Then stop, go and do something nice, get some fresh air, go and see a friend, go and have a coffee, and then you can always come back and do another session later on. But you're going to get more done in that time than you would do if you're just staring at your books all day. So Q&A. Now I'm going to manage this as quickly and as efficiently as possible because I want to get through some of the questions that have come up. As I said, often there are, you know, similar questions coming up from most people. Some of the key things that I think is important to know. Someone's asked, do we need to remember the IASs and even the ISAs by memory for the exams? The answer is no. As long as you know the treatment and you are aware of, so if it's an accounting standard, you're aware that, you know, there's training costs is not allowed to be capitalized for a new asset, then that's all you need to know. You don't have to quote the standard number, but if you know it, great, put it in, impress the marker. But we are actually testing you in this exam on audit and how to operate an audit effectively and what needs to be considered. We're not doing a financial reporting exam. So don't stress about trying to remember all of the numbers. I'd rather you knew all of the key content that comes from them. Let me just look at another one. So one of the questions came up was that often when you're looking at suggested answers from the theoretical answers, they're often very detailed and chunky and there's lots of additional information. Remember, those suggested answers that they give you are quite informative. They are good background reading. They're trying to give you as much information as possible, but they're not really what you can create in the exam. What I would say is if you've got a theoretical question, let's say it's 5 marks, it means you've got to say 5 things. So think of the 5 points that you're going to make and write a sentence or 2 maximum, but normally a sentence is enough on each of those 5, and then that should be enough, leaving spaces between each one. So don't get bogged down with writing lots and lots of information, because it's often not necessary. There was a question about exam kits, and often with exam kits with chunks of information coming from the examiners in the suggested answers. Yes, what they've done is often they are taking the extracts from the examiner's report and they're putting them specifically with that question. So yes, you are reviewing that information. However, remember that the examiner's report is also giving you overall information, and it's giving you information on some section A questions, so you can focus on those as well by looking directly at the examiner's report. Just done some deficiencies and control questions, so that hopefully that extract will help you on that. There was a question on how should my answer differ from the auditor response compared to a substantive audit procedure question. The difference is the fact that it doesn't have to be a substantive audit procedure. Often what I would say with an audit response question is to give an idea of the type of work that will need to be carried out. So for example, if we're looking at, I don't know, let's say we're looking at an allowance for receivables that hasn't been included, and we think that maybe it should. So there's a risk that receivables may be overstated because they haven't included an allowance. What we're going to have to do as an audit team is gather evidence to see whether that allowance should be included. So we should be looking at the aged receivables list. So I would probably say that I would inspect the aged receivables list for evidence of any slow payments that need to be investigated. And I would talk to management about their rationale for not including an overall allowance. And that might be enough for a mark there, but I'm not specifically saying an audit procedure. I'm giving an idea of a couple of things that I would need to do. So it can be just slightly more informal than what we would see for a substantive test. Right, a couple of other questions. Shortlist topics for section B. As I said, don't cherry pick, but we know what's guaranteed to come up in this exam. You are going to get an audit risk question, and it will be between 6 to 8 audit risks. So you're looking at between 12 to 16 marks on audit risk alone. So it is chunky, definitely needs some work. Controls and deficiencies will come up as well. So you might get direct controls and deficiencies. You might just get deficiencies. You might just get direct controls. So it could be a combination. So make sure you've practiced lots of different variations, which we've got in the practice platform. All of the sample papers have got one in them. So you've got quite a lot of range there to review. But again, that will come up. And then substantive audit procedures as well is also definitely going to come up in section B. Up to 15 marks usually we see purely on substantive audit procedures in that last question, but you might also see some procedures elsewhere as well. Okay, let me just check. Can you provide examples or real audit case studies helpful to get more marks? No. So no, don't add more to enhance your answer at this level. It's about the information they've given you from the scenario that relates to that specific client that they've written about, and it's about information that you can pull out from that scenario and how it applies to the knowledge. So don't try and then compare it to any real life examples, because they won't be able to give you any marks on that. Okay. Right, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I think that's pretty much covered all of the key ones there. So that's pretty much all of those questions answered, which is taking us up to a minute to go. Okay, Risha, I think we're pretty much there.
Yes, Erin. And we have just 1 minute left. And before we end this session, I would like to ask one question on students' behalf. Any tips from you for marginally failed students there are worries amongst the students that they are getting failed by 1 mark or 2 mark like that. So any last minute tip you would like to give them?
It's almost always down to exam technique and question practice. And what I find with anyone who I've spoken to directly relating to marginal fails is that it's just a little bit of exam technique, not adding those explanations to the things that you've picked from the scenario, and not practicing those substantive audit procedures, making them clear. So definitely be more disciplined with your question practice. Obviously, you've got the mock. Make sure that you've prepared and used that. Use the debrief recordings as well on the YouTube channel, because I've debriefed those recordings with exam tip ideas as well to give you an idea of how I would approach that question. So that will give you some more visual insight into that as well. So that will help. And just keep going with that question practice, because if you are that close, it's often just a little bit of tweaking and your knowledge is there. However, remember, you've also got your MEP report, which is on your My ACCA, and that shows the breakdown of what happened in your previous exam. So you can look at that specifically as well, and you can see whether there was particular areas of the syllabus where your percentage was quite low, and maybe then you can target those areas a little bit more specifically. So that's another thing you can use as well. But keep going, because it almost always just happens with extra question practice.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, so with this, we are now running out of time and I need to bring things to a close. I hope you have found today's webinar useful. So you will get the recording via an email as well, and you can use the same registration link also to watch the recorded session. All the resources are there in the resource section, as I had mentioned in the beginning of the webinar. So please take a download of them, copy all the links for yourself from there, and have a PDF of this slide presentation that has been done today. So I have already mentioned that you will be getting an email where you will get the link of the recording session with which you will be able to listen to it again. A big thank you to Erin and the team who is supporting us in the back end and helping us in delivering the session successfully. And also to all the students for their participation. Wish you all the very best for your exam preparations and your exams as well. Goodbye, everyone.
Good luck.
Bye.